The fluffy, peaceful Gobbos have been kidnapped and imprisoned by the evil Baron Dante. The lands are in chaos and there's only one hero brave enough and green enough to save them. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. I'm Josh Drive Hayes. Today we're going back to 1997, strapping our backpack on and adventuring through the lush grassland, dark dank caves, dry deserts and frozen tundras before ascending Baron Dante's castle and saving the Gobbo King. Then I'll be showing you all the hidden levels, collecting all the jigsaw pieces and testing my skill against the hidden boss before asking the simple question, Croc, Legend of the Gobbos, was it any good? As usual, a massive thank you to all the supporters on Patreon and Twitch who keep the channel alive. More information on how you can support at the end. For now, let's begin. Croc actually came on the same demo disc as Armored Core, Sampler Disc 4, and as we'll see later, there's a very strange connection between Croc and Otherland, one of the strangest MMORPGs I've ever played. We'll be looking at the connections to Rayman, Tomb Raider, Mario, Sonic, Pandemonium and Banjo-Kazooie because Croc is truly a melting pot of ideas. Originally developed as a Yoshi racing game for Nintendo, that idea was ultimately scrapped, but the engine and assets were kept and repurposed into one of the PlayStation 1's most successful platformers. Croc actually sits as the 31st best-selling PlayStation 1 game at just over 3 million copies. Croc was originally released for the PlayStation 1 and PC. In this video, I'll be playing the PlayStation 1 version. Now, this video is not sponsored, but I do think it's important that you know Croc is now considered abandonware and can be downloaded for free from My Abandonware. Interesting fact, Croc was made in the B-Render engine, or Blazing Renderer, the same engine responsible for Carmageddon, Carmageddon 2, Sensible Soccer 98, and Microsoft 3D Movie Maker. And on May the 3rd, it was tweeted out that the B-Render engine was going open source. You can download it and have a play around right now. Now, Croc has two very deep personal connections to me. The first, I had this game as a kid and I played it to death. I loved it, so I know I'm coming at this with a heavy nostalgic bias. But I'm going to do my best to push that aside and judge it purely from what it is, not what it means to me. The second connection, Croc's level designer is Nick Cusworth. Now, regular viewers of my other MMORPG-focused channel may remember my 10-part playthrough of the insane MMO Otherland, the 100-hour journey to finish one of the strangest and most fascinating MMOs I'd ever discovered. Nick Cusworth was the lead game designer on Otherland, and he did an absolutely incredible job on that. So let's see how Croc's level design holds up. The game starts with the Argonaut logo being inflated by these cute little creatures. These are Gobbos, and such a simple scene sets the tone quite nicely. Cheeky, silly, and a little bit dumb. And then we get the intro movie. No dialogue means relying on visual storytelling. In fact, the lack of text tutorials or dialogue at all means you can port the game to any country and it will still make sense. It's a skill to tell a story with no dialogue and a greater game design challenge to teach a player controls and mechanics with no tutorial text. Our story starts with Croc, a baby crocodile found in a floating basket and raised by the king of the Gobbos to become the defender of the Gobbo village, and then the evil Baron Dante shows up and kidnaps the king. With the king's final act, he magics Croc away to safety. So now Croc begins his quest to defeat the evil Baron Dante and save his adopted father, the king. We are thrown to the menu and get one of the most memorable bits, the music. The music in Croc was composed by Justin Charvona, who previously worked on the Lemmings soundtrack, and would go on to work on Croc 2, Alien Resurrection the game, and Bionicle the game. For Croc, Justin went with jazz, funk, and general grooviness. It's catchy, it's fun, and you'll find yourself humming the main theme for years after you finish the game. The game itself is divided into 5 worlds with up to 8 levels on each world, 6 platforming levels and 2 bosses. The level notation is 1-1, reminiscent of the Mario games World and then Stage, and links back to its origins as a Yoshi game. The controls are relatively simple, forward, backward, left and right, but tank controls left and right, turning Tomb Raider style. L1 and R1 strafe very slowly, X jumps in the air, and pressing X while you're in the air makes you stomp down. You can break boxes and kill enemies by stomping on them. Square is your tail whip attack, similar to Crash Bandicoot's signature spin, and holding triangle lets you manually look around and admire the view. Circle does a quick 180 spin around. You can do this while on the floor or in the air to get around quicker, and that's pretty much it. The controls are very basic, but we'll see the game does introduce new mechanics consistently. The pacing of increasing the platforming complexity and mechanical challenge is very nice. Each level is broken into smaller sections, rooms if you will, and transitions between these sections vary from simply walking through a door to a more complex stamping on a wooden board covering a well and falling into the well. The first world is mostly green grass and felled trees, but once you're underground you've got obsidian caves and lava flows, complete with moving platforms. And some platforms which shake and then crumble away. Around the level you'll see gems. These work like the rings in Sonic. Collect 100 of these to gain an extra life. If you take damage while carrying any number of gems, they will fly out of you and begin to disappear. You can collect them quickly before they do. As long as you have 1 gem, you effectively have a shield. Get hit with no gems on you and you will die, lose a life and have to restart the level. If you lose all your lives, you have to restart the game. And the hitboxes in this game are awful. It's extremely hard to tell when you are too close to an enemy, so you will die a lot. Some gems, however, are special. Each level has 5 hidden coloured gems, and finding them all unlocks the hidden bonus gem door at the end of that level. In the first few worlds, this is really easy, because the coloured gems are coloured while floating in the world. You can see the red or the green or the blue, but about halfway into the game, the special coloured gems change to look exactly like the normal gems in the overworld, meaning you have to collect every gem you see because you don't know if it's a special gem until you get it. Around every level, you'll also find 6 hidden Gobbos. These can be inside cages, boxes, or just in hard-to-reach places. Rescuing all 6 will be needed for the final hidden boss ending. And here's something that scared the hell out of me as a kid. Some of the wells are guarded by giant pink worms. It's just so unexpected. They'll lunge at you, run around and you can dodge them pretty easily, and then you can jump down the well after them, sometimes finding a hidden area. Along with running and jumping, there's also a very basic hanging system. If you just about grab the edge of a box, you can pull yourself up, but there's no sideways shimmy here, which is a shame because Tomb Raider 1 had a sideways shimmy system and released 1 year before Croc. So now we've covered all the basics: run, jump, climb, tail whip, smash boxes, collect gems and find Gobbos. Let's get pedantic. Many people say Croc was awkward to control, and I can understand that tank controls aren't the smoothest to play a platforming game with, but I think I've found the exact reason people find Croc difficult. While on the floor, left and right on the D-pad will turn you, and L1 and R1 will strafe you relative to the camera. However, in the air, this is reversed. If you jump while in the air, pressing left and right doesn't turn you anymore. It shifts you to the left or the right with the camera locked behind you, and L1 and R1 now turn. It's essentially switching the function of the left and right buttons and the L1 and R1 buttons while in the air. This means if you're running along turning right and jump, while you'd expect to keep turning while in the air to create a smooth curve for the jump, instead you now just shift. You may have calculated the path of the jump based off the idea you'd continue in a smooth curve, and now you're strafing in mid-air. It's jarring, and when you land, it's back to normal. When you do reach the end of the level, you've got 2 choices. Tail whip the gong, or if you've found all 5 special gems, go through the gem door. Gem doors are usually extra challenges which reward lives and Gobbos, or introduce new mechanics, like the bouncy jelly. Stamp on it for a higher bounce, or the balloon transport. Grab the string and you'll be flown across the gaps. Some Gobbos are trapped in cages. You either need to press a button to remove them, or find a silver key and then run into the cage. When you do finish a level, you'll get a quick recap, but in an interesting touch, your collected gems are now stored, and when when you finish the next level, those gems get stored as well. And every time you reach 100 in your total stored, you'll get an extra life. So gems stack between levels in your storage. Within the first few levels of the first island, you can very clearly see the multiple inspirations for Croc. The origins of being a Mario game, a kidnapped royal family member, the naming conventions of levels being world-stage, Croc himself likely being born from Yoshi, the backpack of Lara Croft from Tomb Raider, the tank controls, running, jumping, swimming, swinging, the level selection map screen and tailspin attack of Crash Bandicoot, press square to spin, find the hidden coloured gems in a level to unlock a hidden path. The gems acting as the rings from Sonic, taking damage and spilling them all around, pick them up before they fade. The Gobbos being cute and trapped in cages like the Electoons from Rayman, having 6 hidden in every level and needing to find all of them to unlock the true hidden boss. But probably the most direct comparison platformer to platformer, and likely the reason Croc never quite rose to superstardom despite selling well, was Mario 64, which actually released 1 year before Croc. The N64 had the analog stick for fluid 3D movement, a complex triple jump mechanic, an open hub zone to act as the map, freedom of choice in the level order, and much bigger environments. Even the Croc 1 review from IGN back in 1997 opens with the line, "It has been said that imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. If this is the case, then Croc should make Mario 64 blush deeper shades of red than have ever been seen before." Croc isn't a bad gameplay experience by any means, but it is a very obvious amalgamation of other games. Inspiration has been taken from what's worked before, and it's been smashed together and produced something decent but not groundbreaking. It's a platformer imitating other, better platformers. In 1997, the home console wars were well underway and the PlayStation versus N64 debate was strong. When PlayStation fans pointed to Croc, all the N64 fans had to do was point to Mario 64, and no one could deny the N64 fans had the better game. Indeed, the same IGN review ends with, "Croc is definitely a good, slick platform game, but it is highly derivative of other titles. If you're a relative newcomer to this sort of game, you'll definitely enjoy it. If you're a seasoned gamer, look elsewhere." But I wanted to be fair to Croc, so let's go level by level and discuss the good and the bad, because there are some design choices I really admire, like the opening of level 1-2. You can see some gems floating on the wall above you, but that's the edge of the level, right? You shouldn't be able to get there. Well, you can climb up and run around. This is a great touch. Platformer games need a way to hem the player in, and by letting the player explore on what they believe to be the top of the level, you're removing that feeling of boundary. Croc's levels aren't big, but they do feel open because there's a sense of depth and distance stretching out toward the skybox. In these caves, the smashable boxes are cleverly woven into the platforming itself. Your first instinct is to smash a box, but you need to climb over them to reach the higher areas first, and this is a puzzle choice we'll see done repeatedly. Sometimes you have to backtrack through levels, finding a key toward the end and remembering the cage at the start, and they're always optional. It's never anything complex, but it does add a little variety. It's not always forward progression. If you do finish a level and miss a gem or a gobbo, you need to replay it, but thankfully each level only takes about 4 or 5 minutes. They are extremely short. 1-3 starts with a nice touch which will come to haunt your playthroughs. If you turn around and look behind you, you'll find some boxes. So the player now knows, look behind you at the start of a level. Unfortunately, this is one of the only levels you actually have to do this on. And it's the third level in the game, meaning you are going to be turning around at the start of every single level for the rest of the game. Teaching the player to do something early on is fine. Tomb Raider 1 has the very first secret hidden at the start of the first level, encouraging you to seek out secrets. But when you encourage the player to act or play in a certain way, you need to then make sure you have rewards set up throughout your game periodically for that behaviour. If you have the player turn around at the start of a level, make it relevant to do in the future levels as well. More platforming stuff, moving switches. Stand on the button to move, and this is actually the first time we pass through a coloured gem disguised as a normal gem. It's unavoidable, so the player cannot miss this secret. you are always exposed to the fact coloured gems are now hidden. This is a good use of railroading to introduce a new mechanic. Along with the hidden gems unlocking the gem door, you'll sometimes find super secret hidden sparkles, and these will whisk you away to hidden parts of the level and usually reward you with a load of lives, big red floating hearts. The game showers you with lives early on, which is good because the difficulty spike in the final 2 levels is brutal. Jumping down this well gets us to a strange minigame. It's the classic cup and ball routine, except with 3 boxes and 1 gobbo. What makes this difficult is you only get 1 chance. If you choose the wrong box, you have to replay the entire level to try again, and this is the design we'll see used repeatedly in Croc, putting a challenge in the middle or at the end of a level and making the player replay the entire level to have another go at it. Now we get push blocks, move them around within the limitation of the purple floor. Push block puzzles are insultingly easy. I know this is a kid's game, but every single block puzzle is just push the block a few spaces forward, jump on it, win. Another mechanic we'll see used as a crutch later. Sometimes you'll find golden keys and they unlock golden locks on doors. Now you'll usually always find golden keys in your regular level route, so it's not really a case of finding a key and backtracking, it's a case of here's a key, here's the door, keep going. The first use of the ladder of boxes level design. Run to the top, smash the top one, repeat. Another design choice we will see used many times. I've realised by now that Croc uses a select few designs repeatedly. The button minigame, the box ladder, the key then door, pushing a block 1 space and then jumping on it in many of the levels. And this has pros and cons. It's good that the levels themselves contain varied mechanics, but the variation very quickly becomes stale and causes all of the mid-game levels to blend into one big feeling level. The worlds don't feel different. Aesthetically they look different, but mechanically they play the same. And the levels within the worlds themselves don't feel unique. They all feel like a remix of the same 6 or 7 mechanics. The only exception being the final castle island, which pulled out all the stops and shows what Croc can really be. We'll get to that world eventually. Hiding the key behind the exit gong, you sneaky game. I like it. Another gem minigame. Splat the sheep. Why? This is also the first experience of the 3-button game, forwards, left and right. Jump on the button to do a thing. And I think it's probably this button game that was responsible for the switch in movement from the ground to the air. While in the air, pressing left and right to move from button to button is actually quite easy. Unfortunately, the game itself is just not that engaging. I think Croc's designers knew they had limited resources to work with, and they knew the 3-button game was going to be a crutch. Now the first mini-boss. A little cinematic shows Baron Dante using his evil magic to turn this bird into a boxer, and we have to set off to fight it. Boss levels all start with smaller platforming sections leading to the fight. Another mechanic. This platform, which looks like the Chaos Undivided symbol. Stand on it and it moves. Turning now turns the platform. And while I like the idea of the platform itself and can see its possible use in a bigger puzzle, its use here highlights another major design issue. Every puzzle in Croc is self-contained. In this room, you do this, move on. In another room, you do this, move on. Every puzzle is a small combination of a few mechanics, but has no real impact on the level as a whole. You could rearrange the individual levels within a world, or even individual rooms within a level. You could mix and match between transitions, and you wouldn't actually lose anything. It feels very fragmented, like there's no cohesion between the loading screens. The rooms themselves don't need to be in this order. The levels don't need to be progressed in this order. It's almost like they designed a puzzle and then just slapped it down, without thinking of its greater impact in a greater puzzle. On to the first boss, and there's no way to avoid this. The bosses are bad. There's one mini-boss and one main boss per world, and then the final hidden 9th boss. The process for beating all of them is almost identical. Hit them 3 times. Each boss is only vulnerable after they do a move to attack you. The only change in mechanic is baiting them into doing their move. This boxer dude punches, then gets tired. Tail whip him when he's tired. But there is challenge to the fight, just not from the intended mechanics. It's from the atrocious hitboxes. If you get a little too close and you are not locked into your tail whip animation, you are vulnerable, so you will die. But you have no idea how close is too close because the hitbox of the enemy isn't mapped to its model. It extends into the general area around the model. So the majority of your deaths in Croc will not feel like your fault. It will feel like the game has suddenly decided, oh, you die now. Beating a boss always shows them reverting back to their normal mode, and then the magical bird comes and whisks you away to the next island. In 1-5 there's an enemy flying around a platform I need to get to, so I kill it, but by the time I press a button and get back to the platform the enemy has respawned, which is a nice touch. Enemies do not stay dead for long, they respawn quite quickly, because defeating the enemy is part of the puzzle and is designed to be done within the process of the puzzle, not done ahead of time. They've managed to make sure combat is integrated into the flow of your movement through the level. You need to attack while jumping after having pressed the button. This is the process they developed, and this is what you have to do. This is nice. I now accidentally break a box and think, I needed that to jump on, so I quit the game and go to restart, and I learn a valuable lesson. Croc does not have an autosave. It needs you to manually save after each level, or write down the password. And this brings me to my problem with Croc's password system. Passwords in Croc are input using the directional buttons on the PlayStation D-pad up, down, left and right. If you saw this symbol, which direction do you think this means? I mean, it's pointing to the right. So many people would assume it means right, but wrong. That's left. The PlayStation directional pad looks like this. So instead of using arrows to represent the directions in Croc's passwords, they've used the exact button shape from the controller itself. Now this shape looks fine on the controller because all 4 buttons are converging in the middle of a circle, but taken out of context looks like it's pointing in the opposite direction. And given how a password in Croc PlayStation 1 looks like this, you can see it's not the most visually pleasing, user-friendly password system. Eventually the game does start to show glimpses of what it can be once it stops copying and starts pushing its own boundaries. This fireball room. Run forward, hit switch, spin round, climb up. Croc doesn't have the smooth or free-form flow of Mario, but it does have tight enough controls that when it starts making the platforming difficult with timing and precision jumps, it does become a lot more fun. 1-6 adds in metal grills. You can swing under these, just jump at the right time and you'll grab on. Now you can't attack while swinging and the camera will sway quite heavily as you move. In later levels you'll end up swinging under and then jumping on and backtracking over these, which leads to quite nice, densely packed platforming puzzles. Chase the box, another mechanic used about once every world. It'll run directly away from you, so you can make it bounce off a wall and then jump on top of it. A nice little distraction, but again, a completely isolated mechanic from the rest of the level. There's never a moment where chasing a box is part of a larger, more elaborate puzzle. The individual design elements feel so fragmented. It's got moments of decent design, like these moving platforms you need to time your jumps across, like a backward moving log conveyor belt. It's just a shame that Croc's mechanics all exist in walled-off sections of the level, and one mechanic very rarely benefits from the existence of another. Imagine this log platform bit leading to a spiral of crumbling platforms which lead to a platform above with a moving box on it, but parts of the floor fall away and you need to make the floor fall and then force the box to drop through the hole you've created so you could push it onto a lava river and jump across. Croc doesn't suffer from a lack of platforming ideas, it suffers from a lack of combining these ideas into a more complete, complex experience. And now the swimming bit. You've had lava, so you know jumping into strange liquids is bad, but water is fine, but only light blue water. Dark blue water still kills you. The swimming in Croc is again quite awkward. Pressing X repeatedly swims forward fast, holding X paddles at a slower pace, and turning now works in 3D, but there's a delay and then a huge oversteer. Pressing left to turn does a very little left shift to the Croc model at first, and then adds a large swing of movement. It feels sluggish, and underwater combat is even more so. Square now attacks straight forward, but the hitbox issue continues. How close can you get to an enemy before needing to attack? Because some enemies have a ranged attack, and if you attack too early, you're left in the attack recovery animation and you are vulnerable in this phase. World 1 boss time. But before that, stamp on this stone to find a hidden section, an absolute gauntlet of wells, worms and hearts. So I load up on lives and go and take on the boss, a giant boxing ladybird. Bait it into a punch, tail whip it so it falls down, then stamp on its stomach. Repeat 3 times and win. On to World 2, the Land of Ice. An ice level in a 90s platform game of course means slippery surfaces, slow acceleration and then no friction, and now a nice exploration of the hanging mechanic. Some enemies walk on top of the grills and then stamp down. If you're under them when they stamp, you'll be knocked loose. Unfortunately, there's no real way to know the range of the knock loose effect from the enemy, so you just need to time your movement to swing under a stamp. Nice touch. Combat is now getting a bit more risky. Enemies charge towards you, and if you miss a tail whip or mistime a slam attack, which is easy to do because ranges and hitboxes aren't obvious, you'll be hit while still recovering. Now the ice does make platforming more difficult, but unlike Rayman, the slippy low friction movement on ice does not continue into the air. In fact, if you jump, you'll immediately regain full control, so jumping across ice is a good way to not slide around. World 2 Stage 2. Level name, Be Wheelie Careful. Named because of the big wheels you have to jump across, and while this level name does make sense, most of them don't. Every level in Croc is named, and most of them are puns. I snow him so well. License to chill, lights camel action, life's a beach. And some are just descriptions of the mechanics you're about to face. Mud Pit Mania having a lot of mud pits, Leap of Faith being mostly a jumping level. By now the secret gem doors are substantially harder to access. You'll find the end of the level gong and then think, nope, I'm not done yet. Getting all the coloured gems isn't hard, so you do feel inclined to see what the secret actually is. Like this move the cauldron back and forth to catch falling gems minigame. Oh, if you miss one gem, you fail and you have to restart the whole level to get another chance. Which I think honestly is just artificial padding of the difficulty of this specific minigame. Catch all the gems and get the last gobbo. World 2-3 is probably one of the best designed parts. It's a loop level. You need keys, buttons and boxes, but only by running around the whole level twice do you unlock everything needed to actually advance. They did a lot with a limited space. It also shows you how gems softly sink underwater, which shows they did think about underwater physics, which means it's a shame they never used that in a puzzle context, like pushing a box onto a switch underwater. This is when we reach this small but densely packed gauntlet of mechanics, moving platforms, jumps, enemies. This is probably the moment Croc starts to break away from its derivative nature and becomes more its own thing. It can be a densely packed platform puzzler with multiple mechanics all relying on each other when it tries to. The issue is it just doesn't try all that often. And again, if you think I'm being harsh or unfair to an old game by judging it from today's standards, remember Croc came out 1 year after Mario 64, 1 year after Crash Bandicoot, 2 years after Rayman, the same year as Tomb Raider 2. Even comparing it to its contemporaries at the time, Croc's platforming mechanics left a lot to be desired. But you do have some nice touches, like how on the cold levels, Croc shivers if you don't move. It's a nice idle animation, but again, I'm thinking, is this a Croc-specific design? Or is this just taking inspiration from the classic Sonic foot-tapping idle animation? Dodge through this room filled with a synchronized penguin attack team, and then I notice a strange thing. Something I never quite noticed as a kid, but as an adult, it makes no sense. Look at the skybox. Why does the distant skybox have the silhouette of medieval fantasy castles, towers and turrets? That doesn't fit the aesthetic of an ice level at all. I'd expect ice drifts or glaciers, maybe an igloo, snowflake motifs. But look, it's giant mushrooms, smooth shapes which look like plants, flora and fauna, Stonehenge, pointed spires and castle drawbridges. Why is a fantasy magical aesthetic skybox being used for an ice level where you never encounter any of these things? And this made me question, is Croc simply the best use of a collection of assets that they already had? Did they already have this skybox and just decide it'll do? I can't see anyone designing a skybox for an ice level and going with this theme out of choice. It feels like they just already had access to this and made the best of it. And the more I think about this, the more it makes sense, because Croc started as a Yoshi game, and this skybox, despite being used in the ice level, is quite literally a mushroom kingdom. The ice mini-boss is some guy with a jetpack. Wait for him to fall to the floor, tail whip him 3 times, done. The start of 2-4 is nice. You get presented with this lovely view of various mechanics and you instantly begin planning a route, and now you're timing jumps onto platforms, shooting up and hopping through a tunnel filled with unstable platforms, and this does highlight a strength of Croc. The camera is quite good. It's almost always where it needs to be, directly behind when you are moving and swinging round in tight spaces to help line jumps up. The advantage to being a linear game is they can design the camera to drift into a soft-locked, helpful position for set piece design. This softlock actually happens in boss levels too. Normally the camera is behind Croc, but in a boss level it's gently pulled to either side to keep the boss in frame even if you are running sideways, because they know seeing the boss is more important than having a camera directly behind you in this situation. That's a really nice mechanical touch. Having the camera act differently at different parts of the game is a risky move because players value consistency, but altering the camera's behaviour very slightly to enhance the player's experience of a given moment is a nice thing to do. These platforms with arrows pointing down drop after being stood on, and I have to ask, what's the difference compared to a crumbling platform? Both of them drop you down after the same amount of time. Both of them respawn. This is a mechanically identical reskin of a platform type we already have. World 2-6, a larger version of the backward moving platform treadmill. I jump, miss, and fall to my death, but I spot a strange looking platform below. So I time a risky jump, land it just, and get whisked away to another secret. I have to say they have really hidden these secret platforms remarkably well. If you didn't backtrack or fail that jump, you wouldn't see this. Another 3-button minigame, Pop the Penguins, same as the sheep one from earlier. World 2 boss level, and oh okay, now we start to play around with the ambient lighting. I like this. The shading on Croc's character model is lovely and the light source is nicely respected. And the use of flying enemies, hazards and buttons within a low light environment adds a whole new dimension. Now don't get me wrong, I like this level, but I'm reminded of the low light level from Rayman and the low light level from Crash Bandicoot. And it's this constant comparison which is hurting my experience with Croc. Because in Crash and Rayman the lack of light makes sense given the context of the level. In Crash you're sneaking through an unexplored part of Cortex's castle, and in Rayman you're in a cave. But in Croc it almost feels as if they've decided, right, now it's the low light level with no real reason for it being a low light level. If Croc was the first platform game you ever played, I can imagine you would absolutely love it and think it was groundbreaking, doing all these super smart things. But if you bought it after playing the games it's inspired by, you'd feel like you're watching a clip show. A greatest hits of mechanics out of context. Croc is not a bad game, but I don't feel it does anything uniquely Croc. There's nothing I can point to and say, that's what makes Croc Croc. That's what Croc does better than anything else. That's what Croc did that moved the gaming landscape forward, because honestly, it doesn't. It's a decently fun, competently made collection of mechanics heavily inspired by things other games have already done. Next boss, a Yeti, created from 4 sheep moulded together by Baron Dante, so when you attack one it splits into 2 smaller enemies and then finally 4 even smaller ones. Tail whip them each to finish them off. Off to the desert. I do appreciate the small graphical flourishes, like the edging of the question mark boxes and the runic inscriptions on the frame of the area transition doors, or the tar pits having angled slippy edges so floors are now a bit more hazardous. This level nicely combines 2 mechanics, bouncing jelly and long jumps. You need to run, jump and bounce off the jelly to make it. Now that is a lovely example of taking 2 simple mechanics and combining them together to make a different, more engaging experience. Yes, the traditional desert elephant. This marks one of Croc's strangest bits. Standing on the elephant makes it dart around this mud pool and you jump off in the corners to reach the boxes. Croc sees you helping many animals, defeating their evil forms and reverting them back to normal. You are the champion of the Gobbos, and yet you don't work with many animals to defeat Baron Dante. This small elephant bit is, again, an entirely self-contained mechanic that we won't see used anywhere else. This is also the first time we encounter a new kind of gem door reward. Race the Ghost. At the end of this path is a key and a caged Gobbo. You need to get the key before the ghost, because if the ghost wins, it eats the key, and even if you die and retry, the key will still be gone. So if you do fail, you need to replay the entire level from the beginning. Now the ghost is faster than you, but the gems slow the ghost down. So you actually want to avoid collecting the gems to guarantee you win the race. Now this is a lovely subversion of expectations. The gems are set up to be easy to collect and lead us to the end, but we are trying to actively avoid them. Nice use of the gem mechanic. 3-2 Mud Pit Mania, another level which is very enjoyable. Thin platforms surrounded by deadly mud pits, low light, stretch platforms, hanging grates and precision jumps. Nice design all around. And then there's this random whirlwind which throws you away. I think you're meant to time running past it, but it grabs you and pulls you in even if you're quite far away. Again, it's a hitbox issue. Optional paths in the dark, flying enemies ready to knock you out the air into deadly mud, risky jumps into potential death, slowly creeping around to see the faint glimmer of a platform. This is an undeniably fun level. And then we even expand the underwater potential, adding in timed electric gates and enemies which shoot projectiles, and you have to dodge with a well-timed underwater dash. This is much better. We're now using the unique underwater control scheme to provide a gaming experience the player cannot have above water. Timed dodges. Above ground, another mechanic. A jar of fireflies provides a short duration of light, so you know when to jump. This level feels like they took a step back and said, right, I know what we're doing, but why are we doing it? What can we add to enhance? Instead of just being dark for the sake of being dark, let's use the darkness as a mechanic. Let's give the player control of when the light happens. The gem levels are still racing the ghost, but now you're racing in the dark. Progression of difficulty through stacking mechanics. Good design. The next few levels see the combination of mechanics continue. Now you are riding the omnidirectional platforms to jump on 4 timed buttons to open a door, and the ghost chase now includes the transport balloons. They really did start mixing things up here. Oh good, it's the required underwater boss. Wait for it to attack, swim in, tail whip it 3 times, done. The best thing about this boss is when you defeat it, the magical bird who comes to whisk you away is wearing an adorable little snorkel. World 3, stages 4, 5 and 6 are all very similar. Longer sightlines across desert sections and a slow but consistent difficulty curve. However, I managed to find a secret teleport pad down below, which sends me to this bit, and this is one of the strangest parts of the game. A square monolith in the middle of a small arena, with a tube at the top of each side face, with water pouring out of it, and a single enemy strolling around the top. Now the water doesn't seem dangerous and the enemy can't attack me. None of this seems to have any mechanical impact. In fact, this is the only time we see bursts of water. I don't quite get what this bit is. This feels like an unfinished idea for a puzzle they just slapped into a secret area. I'd describe this whole collection of levels, the mid to late desert section, as the forgettable bit. You know when you play a game as a kid, you replay the first few levels again and again and again and you memorise them, and if you struggle you find a cheat code and skip to the end and play those levels and memorise them, but these levels, the forgotten middle, this is the bit you just don't have any attachment to. I replayed the game for this video and even I'm having trouble remembering exactly what happened in the desert. I remember sliding into mud pits a lot and some enemies shooting me off a hanging platform. And then I just about remember the desert boss, Cactus Jack, a sentient cactus inside a large arena with a cactus spine machine gun and then a whirlwind spin. Same tactics, wait for him to finish his attack, tail whip him 3 times, done. And now we're on to the penultimate world, Dante's Tower. 4-1 is a faster paced journey around the outside of this evil tower. The general aesthetic is black, red trim, gold highlights, suede and deep oak. It's classy and stylised, stained glass windows in the empty black skybox. It's no doubt a visually striking level, and probably one of the most memorable parts of the game. Also, it comes with some of the strangest one-off mechanics, like needing to push this stack of metal boxes into a spiral ladder without any of them falling off each other, then jumping up the edges to get to the top of this building. Or perhaps my favourite bit of design in the entire game, this room. The giant cogs on the lower level need to have smaller connecting wheels added, and there are 4 to add, and you do this by climbing up to 4 question mark boxes via 4 different methods, stamping them, and dropping the connectors into the system below. Then when you get all 4, the whole floor begins to turn and you can jump to the floating platform to leave the level. This was a wonderful use of repetition and mechanics within a single room, all combining to create a greater puzzle. And then probably the creepiest part of Croc. We descend into the dungeon. Replaying this bit unlocked memories I had long forgotten, pushed into the recess of my mind. The dungeons in Croc are actually quite unnerving because of the unexpected enemy design. This shackled prisoner is guarding 3 buttons, and each button opens a door to a cell further in the dungeon, but the prisoner lunges at you if you get too close, and it's just generally a bit wrong. Then the guards themselves are holding giant scythes and spin around, not stopping, so you have to carefully jump past them. If you get too close, you die. Unlocking all 3 jail cells and fighting through gets us to the gem door and another chase level, this time running after an enemy holding a gobbo. I think they developed the chase mechanic and liked it so much they reskinned it 3 times. 4-2 has us back in Dante's castle, complete with funky jazz soundtrack. The music really is one of the best things to come out of this game. I like how sometimes you just hear a distant laugh from Baron Dante. And talking about Baron Dante, the big enemy, let's just address the elephant in the room. Large, in-control reptile, big castles, small minions, staircases and luxury, family portraits and traps. This is basically Bowser's castle. Or at least it may have started as Bowser's castle. It's a little too on the nose. 4-3 sees this strange puzzle, and this is the only time it's used. You inflate this red balloon man, and when it explodes, if you've pushed it close to one of the doors to either side, the door blows open. Meaning this is one of the only levels with choice. You have optional paths to get to the end goal. Why is this the only time this mechanic is used? Who is the balloon guy? Onto the tower mini-boss level. Now the approach to this boss gets us some nice new mechanics. Shrinking floor tiles. In fact, an entire staircase of shrinking floor tiles. Croc does have a bit of a habit of introducing a new mechanic and saying, right, here's a whole staircase of the stuff. The boss here is a little different, a donut-shaped room. They throw bombs at us, and you've got to make the bomb walk over a bounce pad to launch it back toward the boss. Now, I'd like to give this boss praise for being original, both with the room design and the method of attack. But again, it's taking inspiration from the 2.5D platform puzzler Pandemonium, which released 1 year before Croc. In Pandemonium, all boss levels are donut-shaped, scrolling around the edge and flinging things toward the boss. So we launch 3 bombs at it, and it's done. 4-4, Ballistic Meg's Fairway, we get a new enemy type. This speedy dude runs in a straight line and leaves a trail of fire behind them. And a new mechanic. Buttons can flip platforms, switching them from spiked to flat. And it's a shame this mechanic was saved until the last level, because there's a lot you could have done with this on previous worlds. So we're closing in on the final level. Here's my big issue with Croc. It's not a bad game. It's clearly looked at many other very successful platformers and taken inspiration from them. It's taken the ideas and the design elements, but I feel it's failed to understand why those games had those elements. Those games didn't make them as surface level choices, but Croc did. In the original games, they mattered either mechanically or to the lore or story of that game. Croc is using them, but not understanding them. Take the level select screen. You're flying around an island. This is taken from Crash Bandicoot. In Crash Bandicoot, however, the island remains consistent and you track your journey from seashore to the factory. And you see the dotted line leading to the next level. The adventure you go on is related to the dotted line. If it's vertical, it's a climbing level. When you reach the last level, you can track your journey all the way back to the start. It's the same in Super Mario World. In Croc, each world has its own island, and when you move from level 6 of one island to level 1 of the next, there's a black loading screen. So you have no way to relate one island to the other. You don't know how far you've travelled. It's the map of Crash Bandicoot without the meaning of the journey. In Tomb Raider, Lara Croft wears a backpack because you pick items up and use them. You can access the backpack as a game mechanic. It carries your medkits and keys. Croc wears a backpack because Lara Croft wears a backpack. You don't need it for any reason. It's a visual choice not related to a mechanic. In Rayman, Mr. Dark destroys the Great Protoon, which scatters the Electoons across the land because he was the thing holding them in harmony, and then he imprisons them so they can't fight back. And your act of saving them is essential because in the final fight, Mr. Dark takes away your ability to punch, and that is restored to you by the Electoons that you've been saving. In Croc, Baron Dante kidnaps the king and the Gobbos end up scattered around the world for no real reason. He hasn't captured them. Most of the Gobbos are just hanging out in various places and Croc finds them. Sonic is collecting the Chaos Emeralds because if he doesn't, Dr. Robotnik will collect them all and rule the world with an awesome power. Croc is collecting 5 coloured emeralds each level because there's a mechanic that will open a door. It feels like Croc has used all of the choices of other games but not understood why those games made those choices. It's borrowing the results without going through the process which makes the results meaningful. It's not a bad experience, but it does feel like quite an empty experience. 4-5, one of the strangest starts. The level begins on a falling block and then pirates drop down and you fight them off. Then as we push on, everything begins to move. Almost all of the floor sections now move, either up or down or left or right. I'm convinced this is the level the designers discovered how to make the floor move and they just went for it full send. This is actually pretty fun. And the secret gem door of this level leads to a brutal platforming section, shrinking floor blocks, but the next block only spawns when the one you're on is almost gone. Takes a bit of trial and error to memorize, but Croc is undoubtedly more engaging when it is being a bit more brutal. And now the hardest platforming level by far, an absolute spike in the difficulty curve, Panic at Platform Pete's Lair. This is actually a very well designed level, it's just unforgiving. We see this dude, we can assume this is Pete, hitting buttons with a hammer, and every hit the platforms in the level either flip from spikes to flat, or move up or down, or side to side, and we need to jump through every room to the end, matching the jump timings with Pete's button smashing. The difficulty? Well, some rooms are more complex, with 3 buttons, and the platforms now move in all directions, and you need to know when to jump from one platform to the next and when to stand still, and the timing is razor thin. If you jump too early, you'll land on the spinning edge of the platform and get knocked off. If you jump too late, you'll be thrown off your platform, and you need to make it across several platforms in a row without failing. The gem door for this level is even more difficult. This is a seriously challenging platform section. If you were a kid, this is where you burned up all those lives you stockpiled in the first few worlds. Finally, we make it through and you can take on Dante, a 3-phase boss with each phase needing 3 hits. First, lure him to punch you and then tail whip in the recovery. Then he'll charge at you, but only while you're standing still. So stay still, bait a charge, dodge out of the way, and then hit him after he's crashed into the wall. And the third and final phase, he will float into the air and blast lasers at you. Avoid all the lasers by running in a circle around him, and then tail whip after the blast's finished. He'll fire 3, then 5, then 7. It's not the greatest of fights, but eventually, after enough attacks, he goes down and we get a cutscene. Pretty standard stuff. Free the king, save the village, and get a statue put up in our honour, followed by some unskippable credits. But notice the environment in the background of the credits, a crystal room filled with 4 end-of-level gongs. We've never been there. And that's because that is the secret, hidden final level. At the end of the credits, it even tells us, now collect all the jigsaw pieces for the real ending. So let's do that. There are 8 hidden levels, 2 on each world, after the mini-boss and then after the world boss, and these levels are only accessible if you find all 6 Gobbos on the previous 3 levels. So if you find all 6 Gobbos on level 1, 2 and 3, then after the first mini-boss you'll unlock Secret 1. These hidden levels are longer and slightly more complex, but not that mechanically different. They're effectively a condensed version of that world's challenges, and each one ends with a jigsaw piece. And once you've collected all 8 jigsaw pieces, you'll unlock the 5th hidden world, the Crystal World. Now, Croc may be an amalgamation of ideas from other games, but one thing it can claim it inspired itself is the jigsaw pieces in Banjo-Kazooie, because Banjo-Kazooie released after Croc. I guess this is Croc's legacy, hidden jigsaw pieces in secret levels. The Crystal World only has 5 levels, and each level is a condensed, heightened version of an entire world. The first level is the grasslands, except with more fireball throwing enemies and more lava caves. The second is a more intense ice level, even with reused maps from various World 2 stages with added challenge. The third is a desert level with even less light, more enemies and almost unavoidable fire damage. And the final crystal level is styled after Dante's castle, but each room in the castle is a single mechanic taken to its extreme, shrinking blocks, dashing fire dudes, and flipping over spiked tiles. Make it through all the secret worlds, you'll unlock the 5th final secret boss. This is Crystal Dante. And I'm not quite sure what the story is here, or if this is just a purely mechanical challenge. Crystal Dante floats in the centre of a square room with 4 platforms spinning slowly around him, leading to 4 gongs on the outside. You need to ride the platforms and tail whip each gong multiple times in order to kill him, while also jumping over the laser blasts from Dante. The only attack he has, the laser blasts, are easily avoidable provided you are watching and listening. You can jump over the blasts no problem. Whip each gong enough and eventually you'll defeat Crystal Dante and be told congratulations, you have 100% finished Croc. So Croc 1 Legend of the Gobbos took me about 6 hours while stopping to make notes. It's not a long game, but now we've finished it, we can ask, was it any good? Despite my nostalgia and childhood love for the game, I must be honest, It's a pretty standard platformer, and while it's going to be fun for newer players, more experienced gamers will realise it's extremely derivative of other better games. Croc feels like a greatest hits compilation of various mechanics and design choices, but doesn't always gel those choices together, either to each other or to its own character. The first island is a nice intro, Dante's Tower is a lovely experiment in taking mechanics to extremes, but the few middle islands are pretty forgettable. It's not a badly made game, but it's nothing you've not seen before, and you won't have any real reason to return. I feel Croc stands on the strengths of its emulation of other games of the genre instead of doing anything uniquely Croc, and while Croc 2 would release in 1999, that would also suffer from the curse of imitation, being compared unfavourably to Spyro the Dragon, Crash Bandicoot Warped, and Gex Enter the Gecko. Croc, while fun enough to kill an afternoon, essentially exists as a melting pot of other ideas other games did better. So to end the review, I will have to award Croc Supermonium Bandyman Raider, featuring Knuckles, out of 10. Cheers for watching. Another massive thank you to all the supporters on Patreon and Twitch who keep the channel alive. You can support from only £1 a month. Check the video description for links to the Patreon, Twitch, Twitter and Discord. And as always, remember...
Yazoo!